Good evening, everyone. It's already 6:05, so I think we can start. Can somebody kindly unmute and let me know if my screen is visible and if I'm audible?
Yes, madam, you are visible and
Okay,
your
okay.
screen is visible.
And I'm audible. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yes, so good evening, everyone. My name is Aishi and I'm a PMRF Research Scholar from the Department of Chemistry, IIT Bombay. I'm a PMRF TA for this course, Introduction to Professional Scientific Communication. And today we'll be discussing some of the practice problems from this course. Hopefully, that will help you solve this week's current assignments. So, moving on, we'll go to the first question and we'll discuss. So the first question is, which of the following is not the characteristic of a research? Sorry, one second. Yes, so the first question is, which of the following is not the characteristic of research? Research is systematic, research is not a process, research is problem oriented, research is not passive. If anybody would like to unmute and let me know.
Option B.
Yes, option B, research is not a process, right? Yes, so it's correct. The question says which of the following is not a characteristic of research, and research is definitely a process because at the beginning you go through literature review, you focus on a broad topic, you go through literature review regarding that topic, and then you find out gaps from that research topic. Then you write down your hypothesis, you make some predictions, you write a hypothesis, and then you start working towards that. Then you make some objectives out of it, then you start working towards a goal. It's very much a process. So yes, research is not a process is untrue. It is very much a process. Also, research has to be very systematic. If research is unorganized, then that will lead to a lot of problem. You cannot do random experiments, especially in case of experimental lab work. You have to be very systematic. You have to focus. You have to read through research papers. If you want to, if you have some particular objectives, you have to go back and see research papers, what all experiments they have done. For example, if you want to see protein binding interactions, what are the possible experiments that you could do? And then after you have narrowed down the list, then you after you've made the list, then you have to narrow down the list depending on what are the instruments that you have in your institute, or what instruments you can easily access. Even if not in institutes, you can go around to neighboring institutes and access such instruments. So you have to figure out what are the instruments that are easily accessible, and what are the techniques that can be done with those instruments. Then you have to figure out the reagents and all. Reagents you can order; those are easier. Like ordering reagents is easier than ordering instruments and working out. So you can order reagents, or if you don't have that sufficient funding for ordering more reagents, you have to narrow down your experimental techniques further. So obviously it's very systematic. You cannot conduct experiments and then go back and think that this was not supposed to be like this and I have just wasted my reagents. So research is and this is very important for experimental work. So research has to be systematic. If it's unorganized, if it's not systematic, then nothing will be possible. It's very difficult in that way. Obviously research is problem oriented. You have a broad objective in your mind, and then as you go on with your experiments, you gradually narrow it down with data you get. You analyze those data and then you narrow down the objectives, but still it's problem oriented. You do not start randomly. So it's obviously problem oriented, and research is not passive. So research is not a process will be the correct answer. So moving on to the next question, which of the following statements is correct? Discoveries are researches, researches lead to discovery, invention and research are related, none of the above. Anybody? Which do you think is the most relevant? Like as I said before, there's no right or wrong, proper, like nothing has been written on stone. So you can have a different opinion, that's absolutely fine. And out of the four options, which do you think is the most relevant for this question? Somebody has written in the chat box.
It's the option C.
Invention and research are related. Okay,
Yes.
anybody else? Anybody else?
Option B.
B. Research is lead to discovery. Yes, I also feel option B. Can you explain why did you feel it's option C? It can be invention and research related also. So can you explain?
I am doing an explorative research, ma'am.
Okay.
So I'm trying to find a new lead compound from a population. So
Okay.
it's kind of invention and discovery.
Okay.
That's why
Okay.
I preferred option B.
Okay. Whoever said option C, can I explain a little bit? Yes, so invention and research can obviously be related, because invention is like you're doing something for the first time, and the knowledge that you're getting from your research is like being acknowledged in public for the first time. That's invention, right? Mostly, not mostly, mostly research is like building upon something that has already been done, and you try to find gaps in that, and you try to expand the knowledge in that subject. Invention, obviously, research only led to invention, or there can be accidental inventions also, but not all researches are related to invention, if that makes sense. That's what was going through my mind when I said B might be an answer, because invention and discovery are not exactly the same, even though we use the term very like exchangeably, but it's not exactly the same. Researchers definitely need to discovery, because when you're working on something, you have a little bit of knowledge regarding that, maybe not that exact thing that you're working on, because obviously there's something on novelty of in research. So if you're researching something, there has to be a novel component. Otherwise, if you're working on something that has already been published, already people know about it, then there's no point. So obviously, either you're working on something that will add to the information that is already there, that's definitely a kind of discovery. Invention, obviously, preliminary stages, if something is not known at all, preliminary stages, that can be called invention. But not all research, not all kinds of research lead to invention. That's what I thought when I said B might be. So out of these four options, I think B might be the most relevant. But yes, I get why you said invention and research are related. I understand why you said that. So we'll move on to the next question.
Yeah,
Yes.
I would like to add one more point here.
Yes,
Since
yes.
we are comparing invention and research, see, invention is something that doesn't necessarily require research. Like, take a simple example: a mechanic which is living nearby your street, he somehow came up with an idea of an engine which produces less frequent, less friction. Okay, so
Correct.
of course, a mechanic is not a researcher. He don't have all these processes and labs and everything. But he came up with an idea which is something innovative. So on that way, I rejected that point. Basically, all three seems to be a valid
Yes, yes,
correct
correct.
statement here.
Correct.
And in such case, what I usually do is I try to strike off the things which are
Correct.
not really
Correct.
matching. So on that point, I rejected C.
Correct. I agree. And that's a really nice way to go about MCQ questions. When you're reading the options, you try to eliminate, and then you try to focus upon the one that seems the most relevant. I agree with whatever you said. You're correct. Yes. So moving on to the next question. Which of the following statements is correct? In research, objectives can be worded in question form. Objectives can be worded in statement form. Objectives are to be stated in chapter 1 of the thesis. Which one do you think is correct? Anybody? Okay, so option C is definitely correct. Objectives are to be stated in chapter 1 of thesis, otherwise there's no point. Option B might also be correct, because when we are going through literature review and we are finally narrowing down our question, we might write objectives in a statement form. Question form, I have not seen really. Like, people can write some things in question form, like this has been published, this is work has been done, but what about this and this? Like, they're raising some questions. But objectives, I myself, I don't remember having seen objectives in research papers or in professional scientific articles being worded in a question form. There might be some articles where these have been worded in a question form, but statement form is, I have seen in statement form. Like, mostly those are in statement form when you are writing your hypothesis and then you are focusing on the objectives. But option C is definitely correct. That's why I have written that objectives are definitely to be stated in chapter 1 of the thesis, because that's where you build your next chapters on. So yes, so have you ever seen objectives being stated in a question form in any kind of research, professional research article or anywhere? Like,
I
I
have
don't.
seen an article,
Okay.
but I'm actually I went for D option. because B and C were correct.
Correct.
And
Same,
like
same, same.
okay, and since it's like all of the above is given, that is a clear
Yes,
indication
yes,
that this
yes.
is not a multiple
Multiple,
question.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Correct.
that's why I went for D.
Yeah.
I was also doubtful for A, but now my question is, if A is not true, if B is not true, then what is true? I mean, see, objectives, if they are not in a question form, if they are not in a statement form, then what kind of
Yeah.
form it is? Okay, so
Yes.
I'm still not like
Yes. So I found this question on the internet. So I'm not sure if it's. I thought it's an MCQ. So that's why I selected C. B is also the correct answer. I'm not sure about A though. Yeah, you're correct. I don't remember having seen like might be in your report when you're writing reports or thesis or dissertation. I don't think I've seen in question form. Obviously in presentations and all that, seminar presentations and all that, that's also kind of scientific communication. In presentations I've obviously seen objectives sometimes being framed in that manner, because presentations are supposed to be interactive. Because when you're presenting something, you're actually asking your audience to engage in your research. You're asking your audience to ask, like you're basically telling them to ask you questions, because after the presentation, whoever is presenting, he or she always says that the floor is open to questions. There's always a Q&A session after a seminar. So I have seen yes.
Ma'am, for option C, can you
Yes.
please tell us that what all chapters are there and for which respective sections
Okay.
of the thesis? Because
Okay.
I felt I was thinking that option B is correct because objectives are never stated in question form; it is always in the statement form. Moreover, option C I didn't select because uh, chapter 1 is usually about the introduction of the topic. If not introduction, then ROL, then
Yes.
any other, but not the objective. Objective is relatively, I guess, second or third. If you are having the layout that which chapters should be for what respective sections, can you please share that then?
Okay, I'll look for it. Actually, wait 1 second. I have give me 2 minutes. I'll look into it. 1 second. Um, if I have. Okay, so I have actually opened a senior's thesis. So I believe all this kind of thesis related, any kind of formatting and this thing, I think it has a common layout, very true, but it also depends on the institute also. So like for
Yeah, ma'am.
so for I have a senior's thesis open here. So what I can see is, first she has attached an approval sheet, then declaration actually shows basically you'll write a paragraph that all this work that has been done is original, blah blah blah, and it has been done under the supervision of your guide, and then you
Yes.
add your guide's name. Your guide has to do a signature. Then she has attached an acknowledgement section. A very acknowledgement can be shown in the last also, but she has done it in the first, like very broad acknowledgement. That
Yes.
yeah,
Acknowledgement
acknowledgement.
is
Then
in the
list of
beginning.
then she has added a list of abbreviations, which is very
Yes.
important. If you even if you add a list of abbreviations, something I have learned from my own mistake, even if you add a list of abbreviations, it's required whenever you're writing the text of your thesis, at least for the first 1 or 2 times, at least still use the full form. I've done this mistake. I have added a list of abbreviations during my master's thesis. I had added, but then I thought that was enough. So when I was writing my main thesis, I actually wrote only in the short forms. And then actually I got scolded by one of the professors, because well, he was like, I don't, the only work I do in a day is not reading your work. So every time I'm reading a short form, you have to understand that I have not worked in this area. You are the one who's working in this area, so these abbreviations seem very normal to you. But for someone reading from outside, it's difficult. And I won't, every time I'll read something on page 15, I won't go back to page 3 and read the list of abbreviations. That's very annoying. So he actually explained it to me that even if you're adding a list of abbreviations, at least for the first 2-3 times, it's easier if you write the full form in bracket the abbreviation. So the whoever is reading, they'll read through it, and with time they'll they'll remember the abbreviations if they're reading your entire thesis.
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
yeah,
Yes, it differs from university to
yes,
university,
yeah,
institute to institute.
yeah.
So it is clear that chapter one does not necessarily is allotted for the objective.
No,
So
this is before she has added any kind of chapter. Then you have the abstract. She has not added the abstract in chapter. This is whatever I'm saying is before the chapters. Then list of figures and list of tables. Then she has started with chapter 1. In the chapter 1, she has written introduction, background and motivation, the rationale of the study, and objectives. And in chapter 2, she has written review of scientific literature. Okay.
Oh.
And then from chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, and chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7, she has done different kinds, like she has made a story out of all the work she has done. Chapter 2 to chapter 8, she has basically like whatever work she has done, she has made different stories out of it, and in those chapters only she has written the materials and methods. Suppose she has done part A of the work, which is very concise, so that's concise and compact. She has written that in a compact form in chapter 3. In chapter 3 only she has written a little bit of introduction about the kind of work that she is doing. She has added the materials and methods, then she has described the work, then results and discussion, analysis, etc. Chapter 4, she has done a little different work. The story, she has maintained the story, different work, but then she has added the materials and methods and everything, and then she has worked like that. So I think this is something, I think she must have received the format or the layout from the institute, like, because I have seen that she has added the background, rationale of the study, and objectives in the chapter 1, and everything like abstract, list of figures, list of tables, acknowledgement, declaration, all of abbreviation, all of this are before chapter 1. That is what she has
So
written
ma'am,
even before.
why option B is incorrect?
Option, what is option B? 1 second.
Statement form.
It's not incorrect. That's what I was saying. Like when I saw the 1 second. Someone is when I saw, I thought it would be a multiple choice question. So out of the 4 options, C is definitely correct according to what I thought. Then B, that's what I said, that B is also correct. A, I have not seen in written format as such. That's why I was asking, has anybody seen in any kind of journal or any kind of thesis? Have you seen in question
So
form?
ma'am, can we
Yes.
derive that the
B and C.
options are incorrectly phrased?
Yes. B and C, I think B and C might be true. Even you can actually, chapter 1, you can actually like talk in your own institute and try to see if in your case the objectives are included in chapter 1 or not. I think that's also a very valid question. In some other institute, they might be focusing on the introduction and review of literature in chapter 1,
Yes.
and maybe chapter 2 will have the objectives.
Correct.
What she has done is that she has maintained a very short chapter 1, little bit of introduction, background, why she is doing the study, and then objective. In chapter 2, she has given a very huge review of literature, like it's very huge. Obviously it's a doctoral thesis, so it's not it shouldn't be that small also, like that less number of pages also, but she has written in this manner. In some other institute, some other rule might be followed as well. So I think that also makes sense. The
Thank you.
chapter 2, yeah, objective. So my screen is visible again, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So this is match list A with list B and choose the correct answer from the code given below. Historical method, survey method, philosophical method, and experimental method. And what do you think it matches with in list B? It's self-explanatory from the names only. So the answer will be B, because A is historical method. It will obviously go with past events, whatever past events have been observed and whatever past events have been recorded. Survey method can be matched with vision, because when you're taking a survey, you're taking opinions from a lot of people, So it's kind of how people perceive the situation. Philosophical method can be exceptional cases, and the experimental method is future action. How do you plan to move ahead with the experiments and stuff? So it's not exactly, the question doesn't fall exactly under scientific communication, sorry, but this I think is the most appropriate option out of these four. So moving on to the next question. Good scientific writing can be described as, anybody? This is very important.
Option D.
Option D. Okay, anybody else?
Option D.
Yes, you're correct. It has to be very clear, concise, and compelling. Clear, concise, and convoluted, obviously not. Concise, dense, and compelling, no. Flowery language is also not, advised when you're writing a thesis. It's not a story or a novel or anything. Nobody, even though you need to write in proper grammatical, there shouldn't be any grammatical errors or stuff. Nobody expects a very high vocabulary when you're writing a research journal. It should be crisp, like nobody should have to sit with a dictionary. As I've said before also, it's very discouraging when I go to a paper and it's written in very difficult very difficult words are used that don't even make sense. There's something called technical terms and there's something called flowery terms. Technical terms are sometimes required to make sense of whatever is being written. Still, if you are writing something in the abstract or introduction, people will try to write little bit in layman's language, whatever is possible, so that whoever is reading for the first time, if that person is just starting out with research, that person doesn't have a very difficult time understanding it. But if you're using a lot of flowery language and vocabulary, you're writing in a very like someone will have to sit with a dictionary and thesaurus to understand the writing, that is very discouraging, and that is direct no, like nobody will further go through your report anymore. So it has to be clear, concise, and compelling. It should be compelling enough that you are actually compelling the reader to go through your entire work. So yes, it should be clear, concise, definitely, and compelling. The next question: in the context of submission, what does it mean to determine your audience? Anybody? So that's there was okay.
The option.
Option B. Yes, so attending, since it's written in the context of submission, I guess you're submitting your thesis, not thesis, you're submitting a paper for a journal or submitting a conference paper, journal paper, whatever. So identify the individuals for whom you're writing a research article. What I made out of this sentence was that basically you're identifying the like whenever you write a paper, then you go through some of the journals, you go through the journal specifications, because you have to check if the paper you have written fits in the scope of the journal or not. There are different types of journals, like Journal of Biomedical Research, Journal of Nanomaterials, Journal of Control Release, Journal of, there are different journals, you get the point. So after you're done writing the after you're done with the work, you sit down with the supervisor and you shortlist a few journals, and then you go through the specifications of the journal. Some journals will have a particular referencing style, some journals will have a particular way of writing the article. So you follow that and you write down the journal and you write down the paper and you submit. So option B, what I make out of this option is that identify the basically the scope. The people whom you're writing for is like individuals you're writing for is like the people who will review or people who will review your journal, your article. Before your article gets published, there's a huge process that goes on. At first it can get rejected from desk if it doesn't fit the scope of the journal at all. If it doesn't get and rejection from desk generally happens within a few days or weeks. If it doesn't get rejected from desk, it might have gone to at least reviewing, that people have the journal people have accepted that this paper might be a good addition, but they'll review now. They'll send the article out to like the editors of that journal, who are generally quite hot shots in that field, people who have worked in that field for a long time, people who have experience working in these kind of things, and they'll review the article. Mostly even professors, what I have seen, professors actually ask their students to review. That's a very that's a great practice, because now students who are mostly doctoral students, they are also getting an experience of how to review other people's work. We are so wrapped up in our own work that we don't really get time to discuss with other people what they're working on. But when we are actually reviewing someone else's work, I think that's a very good idea. You're reviewing someone else's work, and you actually see, yeah, that portion of work is being reviewed by a fresh pair of eyes. So now there are more limitations, more shortcomings of the study that come into notice, and then they actually inform the reviewers, the professors who are being who are the editors of the journal. I think they check once, they review again, and then they send a reply that okay, it's accepted for publication, okay, it's a good article, but we cannot publish it right now because there are some questions that we have. These are the questions 1 2 3 we have, and how will you address these questions further? So either you try to explain to them, or you have to conduct some more experiments to explain to them. Papers come back from review all the time. You generally conduct some more experiments to validate your results once again, and then you send the article back for publication, and then the process happens. Either they'll send it, I don't exactly know what's the process for each journal. Either if they're not satisfied, maybe they'll send it back again, and if they're satisfied, they'll either publish, or if they're not satisfied, either they'll reject or they'll ask for further experiments. And sometimes they give suggestions also. And even if some papers reject your journal article completely, they still try to give suggestions. There are some mails I've seen that they have actually rejected the article, that your journal article doesn't fit into our scope, but you can do this, and maybe you can apply again, or you can apply to some other journal, blah blah. So in the context of submission, if I'm submitting my article or something, I need to determine the audience. I need to determine who all my audience is. Like, first, the people who are reviewing a journal, like if my paper fits in the journal scope or not. Second, the people who, if my paper gets published, who are the people who will be reading my paper. Okay, generally people don't go and search based on journals. Generally people write whatever they want to look into. If they want to search regarding COVID-19, suppose, they'll go and Google and write, then they'll see the number of papers, and then they'll select based on the title or the abstract, whatever. But some journals will focus on some particular aspect of COVID-19. Some journals will, Journal of Lipid Research will focus on some lipid aspects. Journal of Biomedical Research will focus on a different aspect. So even readers will read based on what they want to read. So even the audience will also include the readers for whom you're writing, you're basically submitting your article, it's getting published, and there are readers who will focus on your work. So for me, I think that's why I chose option B as the right answer. Specific individuals who are likely reviewing an article, very true. There are not specific. I don't think people get to know who are reviewing the article. I think it's a blind review process. I'm not exactly sure about this, but in most cases, I don't think the corresponding author or the authors of the paper get to know who's reviewing the article at the very first glance. If you're not a very experienced, if you're a new author or new corresponding author, I don't think they'll get to know. Now with time and experience, you actually meet a lot of people in your life, and the academic circle is quite small. So you might know that person is a journal editor, but I don't think from beforehand you get to know who's reviewing your paper. So specific individuals, that word term doesn't work out. And identify the individuals who are likely cited in your paper. If you have cited some individuals, that means that you have either used their information to build up your work, or you have at least written whatever they have already published in order to build a context. So I don't think even that makes sense based on the question. So what does it mean to determine audience? Either it depends on the kind of the scope of the journal. Like if your article fits in the scope of the journal, that will be decided by the reviewers for sure. The reviewers will decide if you're working on something entirely protein based, or if you're working on something entirely computational and you want to submit it to a very known experimental journal that publishes known experimental work, I don't think that will work out. So obviously the reviewers will decide if your paper fits into the scope of the journal. And also the readers like you and me, who will go on Google and search for this particular topic and read the published work. So I think that for that reason, B is the correct answer. So moving on to the next question. Which of the following does not help with clarity in scientific writing? Anybody? Sorry, I'm still in the meeting, right? You're audible? I'm audible, sorry.
Yeah,
Yes,
you're
ma'am.
audible.
Okay, okay, yeah. Yeah, so it will be use of metaphors and flowery language. Obviously, scientific writing has to be very clear and concise. Use of precise word choice is very important. Sometimes we use some words very interchangeably, but most of the time that doesn't work out in scientific writing. So whenever you're writing, the precise word choice has to be very carefully. Little words should be carefully chosen. I've heard from people that even if they do tremendous, like very good work, based on how they write the paper, that also decides if your work will be published or not. Doesn't matter if your work is like nature worthy. Nature journal is a very popular journal with a very high impact factor. So even if your work is like that, you need to write the work. It doesn't matter how well you do the work, you need to present it very carefully as well. That's the basic agenda behind professional scientific communication. So I've heard from people that because they were not really familiar with the English language, or they were not really good with scientific writing, their works have been rejected, but then rejected or at least sent back for review, and then they had to start the entire process again. So just because it's science doesn't mean that writing doesn't matter. uh, High-fi vocabulary and very difficult words don't matter, but proper grammatical sentences, proper word choice is very important for science. And even if you know English very generally, we use English as the language to like English is the most common language where how we publish articles. And even if you know English very well, still it's a very different writing a research journal is a very different ball game. It's an art altogether, and I think it comes with experience. That's why students will start writing, the supervisors will check, they'll send back, and there's a lot of first draft, second draft, third draft that happens before you finalize the manuscript. So it comes with experience, it doesn't come in the first time. So that's very true. So use of precise word choice is very important. So that's why it's very always advised to use softwares like Grammarly or stuff. Sometimes we think, when we write a sentence, we think it when we read out the sentence and we think it sounds correct, but sometimes it's incorrect. Like sometimes it can be incorrect. So for those reasons, you can always use softwares like Grammarly. I think there are other softwares as well. So for writing your book, for I think most institutes might even have license for premium Grammarly premium. So you should definitely make use of that.
Ma'am, you told one software name. Can you repeat that name? Not Grammarly.
Grammarly. It's Grammarly.
Before that, you told one more name. Another
Software
software.
name before I used Grammarly only. I did not say any other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. I use Grammarly. Like our institute has a premium license, so we use Grammarly when we are
Okay.
writing anything. So even when you're writing very fast and you don't really recognize the mistakes in your writing, Grammarly does it really well, and it helps to make your writing more clear and all that. Use of metaphors and flowery language is obviously not advisable at all. Please, whenever we are writing, we have to be very clear regarding this. Making sure pronouns have clear antecedents. That means when you're using any kind of pronoun, for example, I'm using he or she. Now you cannot start a sentence with he said this. Who is he? That's the question. So whenever I'm talking to someone, I'll randomly go and tell them that he left. But who is he? That person needs to be made aware of who I'm talking about. So even if you're using pronouns like this, it, he, she, whatever you're using, they you always need to have a clear thing that who that person who I'm referring to. And limiting the use of scientific jargon, this part is very difficult, because when you are writing a scientific article, there are some words that is very normal to us. Like I'm from biology, I'm working on biology, chemical biology. So words like lipids, liposomes, all these are very these words are so normal to me. I use this in general conversation in lab. When I go to lab, I talk to my supervisor, I talk to my lab people. We use these words regularly, on a regular basis. That's why these words are so common and seem normal to me. But if I'm talking to someone from a physics background, that person might not know what liposome means at all. Then that person might be using terms that will seem like different language altogether to me, because that I don't belong to that background. If I'm talking to someone not from the STEM background at all, that person will not get anything I'm talking about. So use of that's why whenever you're writing a paper, there are some parts where you cannot limit the use of scientific jargon, like methods, materials. You have to use that kind of scientific jargon, but at least in the abstract or a little part of the introduction, it's advisable to limit the use of scientific jargon, so that like people from other fields can also at least understand whatever you're writing about. So there's a very popular competition that happens in some universities abroad. It's called 3-minute thesis. It's a very the concept is very fascinating. That's why I want to share this. It's called 3MT, or 3-minute thesis, and all students are most students are encouraged to participate in it, first year, second year, third year, whatever. So the basic concept of the 3-minute thesis is that you get 3 minutes. You get 3 minutes and you have to explain your entire thesis in 3 minutes. So you can understand how difficult is that. Obviously you cannot sit and explain the methods, the materials, the techniques that you have used. 3 minutes is a very short time, so they have a timer. If you cross the 3-minute time limit, they'll disqualify you. It's that serious. So there's a lot of rules associated with that. Recently the rules had been revised, and I think you can only show one slide on screen, and you have to basically speak in a very compact manner. So when you're, and also another very important rule of this competition is that you have to limit the use of scientific jargon. If I'm talking about my research, someone from humanities background will not get at all. And if someone from humanities research is explaining their research, if they're using very technical terms according to what they're working on, I'll not get anything at all. So what is the point of 3-minute thesis if the audience is not able to realize, not able to understand? And also the audience is supposed to be from diverse backgrounds. That is the rule of this competition. So you can actually go on Google and search. It's a very fascinating concept, and it actually gives people a very broad overview on their work. So how people generally prepare for this, that they explain their whatever they're working on to their family members, preferably people not from the same background, and that's how you basically learn how to limit the use of scientific jargon. So if I'm working on a virus, I'll explain in a very concise manner what a virus is by showing a diagram, probably on the one slide that I'm allowed, and I'll explain what I'm trying to work on and what can be the expected results from my work. That's it. You cannot explain anything more in 3 minutes, obviously. So limiting the use of scientific jargon is very important in any kind of interactive communication, definitely. Scientific papers, I think it's very difficult to limit the use of scientific jargon, and especially I'm guessing if you're reading a scientific article, you are probably from that field. I'll not read an article from a very different background if I don't require that in my work. I'm telling in a general manner. So in written articles is very difficult, but at least in an interactive session where the audience is supposed to interact with the presenter, you should definitely try to limit the use of scientific jargon, and it is not that easy. It's very difficult because those scientific jargons are part and parcel of your life. You use them daily. How do you simplify those even further for someone from a different background to understand? It's not that easy. I advise everyone to try this at least once. If you're working on any project, I will suggest first go to your family, anyone, parents, sisters, brother, anybody who is not from your field at all, and try and see if you can explain your work to them, and if they understand that, and try to time that. Suppose 3 minutes, time yourself and explain your work to them, and see if you can make them understand. It's a very important art as well. Yeah. So that's why the answer will be use of metaphors and flowery language, not at all advised in any kind of scientific writing. Yeah. Next question is, one second. Yeah. So the next question is, redundancy is most likely influencing which aspect of good scientific writing? Anybody? Anybody?
Option B.
Option B. Okay. So D.
Yeah, ma'am.
Okay. So what does redundancy mean exactly? The redundancy basically means something you're redundant. What is a redundant stuff? Something that is not essentially required to put forward the information. It's basically the state of being not or no longer being useful or needed. If you're writing something 2 or 3 times, that is not required, right? If you want to make your
That means repeating the same paragraph, like repeating the same thing again and again.
yes, correct, yes, that's what redundancy means. So if you're writing the same thing again and again, uh, in active voice, passive voice, or if you're unknowingly writing the same thing again and again, that's redundancy. So I think the answer will be being concise, because the other options also make sense, but the first thing that will happen is that you'll make your write up unnecessarily long, and that is not required at all. We need to make our write ups very concise and compact, so there's no point making the thing unnecessarily long. So that will definitely increase the number of words you're using. That will definitely increase the number of sentences. Obviously it can also stop the writer from being intriguing or compelling. If you're repeating the same thing again and again, the reader will actually stop having, like, showing an interest in reading further. So that also makes sense, but the first thing that will happen is that it will make your write up unnecessarily long, and this is something that I have suffered through myself also, because I didn't realize when I was writing it. Another thing, when you're writing a report, you should actually chalk out the layout of the report or the points you are supposed to write from beforehand. So whenever I have written the report, when used to write a report before, I was like, I have to finish this fast, and I used to start writing, and after the entire thing has been written, I used to realize that these things have been explained way too many times, that was not required, and these things which needed to be explained have not been explained at all, and I get a feedback from my supervisor, and I have to redo the entire process again. So that is like huge waste of time. So for that reason, what my supervisor had suggested is that you make at least a very rough sketch, very rough rough layout of what are the points that you wish to, point wise. In bullet format, you write ki I want to write this point in the introduction section. In the materials section, I'll write this point very very concisely, very bullet points, maybe 2-3 words under each point, that's it. And then you write your article or write your report based on that. Otherwise, if you don't have a clear layout in your mind and you start writing randomly, you will end up being redundant. You will write the same stuff again and again. Definitely it's bound to happen, and you'll also miss some important stuff that should have been in your write-up, but you have actually completely missed out on. So yes, being concise is the most relevant of the 4 options, because obviously being redundant will increase the word limit. Obviously being intriguing, as she said, being compelling, these also make sense, because at some point the reader will just lose interest. If the same thing is being repeated again and again, that's just not a good write-up. So the reader will ultimately lose interest and just move on. So yes, that was what this question was all about. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following is not a way to achieve a compelling narrative in your writing? Use passive voice to build an objective stance. Write and rewrite. Use logical and evidence-based reasoning. Start and end strong in your writing. Anybody? Anybody would like to try? Okay, so usage of passive voice is not at all recommended when you're writing a narrative, writing basically a scientific report, because I have read this somewhere that this has been a point of debate among scientists for very long, and during the 20th century, I think researchers focused on writing objectively by describing the actions of the passive voice. But the passive voice basically weakens the story. We know that telling a good story is very powerful way to communicate any kind of information, not only scientific, any kind of information. And good stories are compelling and memorable. They have concrete characters that perform vigorous actions to achieve a goal, and this creates a clear and concise and compelling story. So any kind of, not only scientific research, even if you are going to a stand-up comedy show, even you'll enjoy those people most who are very good storytellers. So with passive voice, what happens, the order of information is reversed. So in other words, passive voice is then when the subject of a sentence receives the action, while active voice is when the subject does the action. So for example, if we can say the scientist counted the cells, this is active voice. The passive voice will be the cells were counted by the scientist. So the first example, which was active voice, was short and precise and very clear. You do not question who did what, and you can visualize the action because it immediately follows the subject. The second example, that is the cells were counted by the scientist, is very long. It's less clear, and to make matters even worse, a scientific writer will often omit the subject to make the sentence more concise. Some people will write the cells were counted. So that gives rise to the questions: are counted by whom? Counted on what? So the writer leaves the sentence open-ended. Who did the counting? So the reader in that case must fill the gap. And if they need to repeatedly fill the gaps, if you're writing in passive voice throughout your report, the reader will need to repeatedly fill the gaps. And even subconsciously, that will just take away their energy. They'll lose any kind of interest they had in the work. Sorry. They'll lose any kind of interest they had in the work, and with time they'll just lose their energy. They'll not enjoy reading the writing, and the story will become less clear and compelling. So that's why passive voice is not at all advised, basically. So I'm reading some. It has been written in a Nature paper in 1996 that using the passive voice in scientific writing allows the researcher to stand at a distance from his or her work. By standing at a distance, an unbiased viewpoint is very much likely to be reached, and an unbiased viewpoint encourages a world view and an open mind, surely prerequisites for good science. So this thing they are saying in this paper, they were saying that passive voice keeps you at a distance from your work, from your data, so that helps in giving an unbiased opinion, and that helps in giving an unbiased opinion about the work. However, nature journals in recent years, nature journals have said that they prefer authors to write in the active voice. That is, we perform the experiment, not the experiment was performed by us. They prefer this kind of active voice writing because experience has shown that readers find concepts and results to be conveyed more clearly if written directly. So that's why active voice is not only more clearer, it's vigorous, it gives you a persuasive power in fewer words than passive voice. So that's why in today's time, using passive voice is not at all recommended in any kind of scientific writing in most journals. So in some kind of journals, they'll already have this rule that write in active voice. So the first option will be the correct answer. The second option is write and rewrite. Obviously, you need to have a lot of drafts of a report or a manuscript before you submit. You'll write it, you'll check it, you'll find a lot of errors, shortcomings. You'll rewrite it. This happens a lot of times if you finally submit the manuscript. So B option is correct. C is use of logical and evidence-based reasoning. Obviously, that's if you want to engage your readers in your narrative, you can actually use both kinds of reasoning. That will help the readers put your work in context with what has already been published before. And start and end strong in your writing. That's why start and end strong in your writing. That's why abstract, introduction, and at the end discussion parts. These are very important parts of any research article. Abstracts will decide if your research article deserves to be read further by any kind of audience, and the discussion part will basically say if the authors tried to think about any future perspectives of the work they've already done. So yeah, you should definitely start and end strong in your writing. So moving on to the next question, the Hourglass Organization of Scientific Writing suggests which of the following? So we have discussed the Hourglass Organization of Scientific Writing a few times before also. So which one do you think is correct? Read through the options and let me know.
C.
C, the introduction and discussion are broad and methods and correct. So as we know, the hourglass structure, the introduction and discussions are supposed to be broad. In the introduction part, you are basically writing a little bit about the kind of literature review that you have done. You are writing a little bit about the work that has already been published. You acknowledge that some work has already been done, and then you narrow it down to your objectives and your materials and methods, results, etc. And the discussion part at the end is again broad, because now you try to fit what you have done in the bigger scope of science. Like now you are fitting your work, and you are trying to show that this had been shown. I have tried to show this, and now this can lead to further experiments, further research. So that's also broad. The methods and results are very narrow because they are very specific to your own research work. So methods, data, analysis, everything will be in the middle narrower part of the hourglass. So that is what the hourglass structure is all about. This is the sketch which I had used to describe the hourglass mode of scientific writing last time also. Introduction will be a broad overview. Discussion will again be a broad overview. Discussion will have your future perspectives, future work that can be done also. The methods and results will be the narrow part because they focus very specific for your own research experiment. Good. So the next question, moving on to the next question, which of the following is generally a method to determine whether or not to include certain details in your research article? Which one do you think is correct? So we can have multiple answers. I've always made this clear for this course. There can be more than one correct answers depending on perspective. So I would like to listen to your perspective also, like how I am explaining why I chose that particular option. You can always unmute and let me know if you think differently. That's encouraged actually. Anybody? Okay, so according to me, it should be option D. The paper should provide just enough detail so that an independent researcher can replicate their research. So I've always highlighted this part. The methods and materials section is very important because whoever is trying to replicate your research or whoever is trying to build on your work, build their work on whatever you have already done, they'll put the most focus on the materials and methods because they'll try to see if it's experimental work. They'll try to see how you have done a particular experiment, what concentrations you have taken, what time points you have taken, how did you do the data analysis, did you use a particular software for doing data analysis, what are the steps you did, you followed. So they'll obviously focus on that. So one of the major aims to publish a paper is so that any other person who's willing to do similar kind of research can actually replicate your results. So that's the most, out of all these four options, that's the most relevant. That's why now option A talks about both written and portrait in either a figure or table. So that also happens. People, if you have a lot of stuff that is easier to present in a figure or table, people do that, and they also explain a little bit in the legend section, and they also explain a little bit in the text section. But it's not like they do both very elaborately. If they have added a figure, they'll explain what the figure means a little bit, and in the legend section and the text section. That also works out. But the article should review the history of the entire field. Not possible. You have to do a very compact literature review based on what the work that you're trying to follow up on. Now I want to work on SARS-CoV-2. If I start writing a paper right now, I cannot put everything in one paper. I cannot write all the history of the entire field. Like work on SARS-CoV-2 started in December 2000, like it started in December 2019. I'm guessing papers started getting published from 2020 onwards. So till today there's a lot of papers. I don't even know the number. So if I want to write something on SARS-CoV-2, I'll focus on only that part of the literature review that will help to build the suspense for my work. I'll not, if I'm working on some protein aspect, I'll write about that particular protein and what has been already shown based on that aspect. I'll not write about everything about the virus. So article should review the history of the entire field. Definitely not possible. Option C is the paper should provide as much detail as possible that the journal allows and present critical information such as key findings and important implications multiple times. They should provide detail, but multiple times key findings and important implications multiple times is not needed. It's also like how we discussed in one of the questions before, redundant. You don't need to explain same thing again and again and again. That's very redundant. That unnecessarily makes a write-up huge, and nobody has to, in today's time, nobody has the patience to go through the same thing again and again. They'll lose interest. So the fourth option is the most relevant. Option A also makes sense, but fourth option is the most important because the you're publishing something so that other people can read that and base their work on that. So obviously an independent researcher should be able to replicate your research. So if anybody has a different viewpoint, you're welcome to unmute and let me know. It's a very interactive session. Yes, so I'll move on to the next question. Which of the following sections is not a basic section of a quantitative research paper? Anybody? If you have got to research paper, three of the options here are very common. One option is very uncommon. You do not see that in a quantitative research paper.
D.
Sorry? D. Correct. B. D option, right?
D.
Yes,
Criticisms.
yes, correct. Generally don't see criticisms in the like in a quantitative research paper. Like people like in the discussion section, the authors might write a little bit of limitations. The authors, the results, methods, and references. These are like indispensable parts of a research paper. You have to mention these three. The criticism part I've never seen in any kind of research paper I have read. What happens is that in discussion session, the authors only they write some of the shortcomings that some of the limitations of their work. We have done this work, but we have actually assumed this to be this. We have taken this to be this. We have done all the work in cell culture. We have not done on any actual animal. These are some of kind of the limitations that the authors only write in the discussion section. So obviously there's no separate section called criticisms as such in any kind of quantitative scientific research paper. Correct. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following pieces of information is typically not on the title page of a manuscript? Anybody?
D.
B.
D. Research
Correct.
acknowledgements.
Correct. Author names will obviously be just below the title. Author affiliations are also very important. Every author, and especially in papers, there are a lot of authors are there. Some papers even have multiple first authors. All the affiliations and everything are mentioned just below the author's names only. Keywords are also mentioned. Keywords actually help in indexing the papers, so that people who are searching for people, whenever they'll search, they'll write particular number of keywords. It's easier to locate your research article easily, because every day lots of papers are getting published from different journals on different websites basically. So keywords is also very important. Research acknowledgements are generally written at the end of the paper. So we have to thank this person for helping us. We have to thank this person for reviewing our article. We have to thank this person for giving us this reagent, blah blah blah. So in a manuscript, in a research journal, research acknowledgements are generally written at the end. But in any kind of thesis or dissertation, I have seen acknowledgements to be written just before, like just after the declaration or certificate part. Whenever you post a declaration that this work is original, done by this person under the supervision of this person, I think after that only most people write acknowledgements in any kind of thesis reports. That will necessarily not be published. That will be for thesis, like for getting a degree. But manuscript, which is supposed to be published on the internet or a journal article, acknowledgements come at the end. So it's not on the title page definitely. Next question. Which of the following is a common restriction regarding title pages? So if you feel that none of the options are correct, you can say that none of the options are correct. That can also happen. So there can be questions also where none of the options are correct. So you can say that also. Anybody? Okay, so according to me, none of the options are correct here. There is often a limit to less than 6 authors. I don't think I have actually read about or heard from anyone about any this kind of restriction in any papers, because I have seen papers having even more than 10, 12 authors. In most like prestigious journals, most of the articles have more than 10, 12 authors, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and obviously more people are needed for that kind of work. So I don't think any journal has this kind of limit. If you know otherwise, please let me know, because I don't know of any kind of journal. It's not, at least if, even if there's a limitation like this, it's not a common restriction, because definitely not common. Some journals might have this kind of restriction, but I am not aware. So if you know, do let me know. So the first option is not correct. Second is, there is often a limit to the number of characters permitted in the title itself. Same, I don't think I have ever read about an article or a journal, about any journal having this kind of restriction. Again, there might be some exceptions as well. So if you ever come across any kind of art journal like this, do let me know. Authors typically do not list their affiliations to help with blind review. Definitely not. I think authors all the time they list their affiliations when they're submitting their paper. In some journals, they also ask for a biodata of the authors. Like along with the affiliations, they ask for a little, one paragraph biodata, like a little bit about the author's background. Some journals ask for this also. So I don't know this affiliation. I have not come across any journal having this kind of rule. Keywords are also always restricted to those provided by the journal only. I don't think that also works, because no matter how specific your journal might be regarding the scope of work that they want to publish in their journal, still different articles will be putting forward different points, and I think it should be under the jurisdiction, or it should be under the authority of the authors who will get to decide what are the keywords that are very essential in locating their research paper online. So similarly, I've not come across any or not heard about any journal with this kind of restriction. So all these four options, I think, they are not correct. All these four options are wrong. It's none of these are very common restrictions regarding 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 title pages of any article. So anybody has any other different viewpoint? Have you ever come across any kind of journal, or have you ever heard of any general journal having these kind of restrictions?
Actually, I have seen in some journals when they, post in let's say, when they are calling out for papers for the publication of, news.
Okay.
So at that time, they do mention some topics
Uh-huh.
which they consider. So
Definitely.
in that way, yeah, I mean that's not common restriction, but I mean,
Yes.
uh, I don't know, like, uh,
I get.
can we actually put answers like null, because eventually one has to
This
be
is,
the
yeah,
correct
yeah,
one.
this is a question I found on the internet. So
Uh,
if I do not agree with any of the options, I'll say that it's not correct.
okay.
Because what you are saying, even I have read mails on that. Whenever they are releasing any kind of special issue, there are always journals releasing special issues regarding, suppose, drug development and nanomaterials. So they sometimes mail authors. I also randomly get sometimes mails from certain journals, um, asking for this kind of specific, but that also topics will definitely be a little more specific, because I won't try to send my article, which is mostly about one particular thing, to a journal that doesn't, that doesn't generally publish articles in that field. So journals are very specific in that manner, that they only acknowledge some articles that belong to their scope of work. So topic is still fine, but I don't think I've seen any kind of keyword restriction like that. So some journals might say that I want work on drug development. So you have to, if you are working on drug development, you can give that, give the manuscript to their journal. But I don't think there'll be any specific restriction like only use these kind of keywords. I think that I have not seen personally. So that's why I think
Yeah.
amongst all the four options. So this is not this question is not from the NPTEL website. I
Okay.
think all the NPTEL websites will have questions with proper options. This is one random question I found on the internet. I thought it was interesting, but I don't agree with any of the options, because none of these are common restrictions. I have not personally come across or heard anything like this
Yeah, but
affiliation. Yeah.
in one of the lecture, Professor Ganesh was speaking like, nowadays some journals do restrict the number of characters.
Okay, might
Yeah,
be.
like in the video interview. But again, we are speaking of common restrictions. So like
Okay, okay.
these are not common. That
Yeah,
I
yeah.
truly agree.
Okay, true. Some journals might have a restriction in the number of characters permitted. Yeah, if someone goes beyond a limit, like title is supposed to be concise, you definitely should not be writing too much. So I think okay, that might be out of the four options. I think that's the most relevant characters. Other things I don't think are very common. Okay. We'll move on to the next question. What is the purpose of the abstract? Provide a clear and in-depth discussion of the implications of the research, discuss the motivation for the research but provide no information about the findings, provide a clear but succinct summary of the research, discuss why the authors think the findings are important to convince the readers to read the article. Again, all these options are kind of, some parts of the options are kind of common. So if you have, I'll explain which option I chose based on what I thought, but you can always go for a different option and explain, give you a different viewpoint as well, because nothing has been written on stone. Like there can be multiple purposes of the abstract. So yeah. Anybody?
And C,
C.
third one.
C. Okay. Provide a clear but succinct summary of the research. Can be. When you say summary, how do you like abstracts are generally very small. Like, will it be possible to summarize the entire research work? And how do you imply that we summarize the work? Like, do we add a little bit of the methods, materials? How does it work? Can you explain a little bit?
One or two sentences on the relevance of this proposal, followed by the approach used, and
Yeah.
the core result I got, and the inference in one or two sentences.
Okay, correct. That can be that works. I think that's fine. Anybody else with any different kind of opinion? Okay, so I felt personally option D, because I think C also works out. I think that it depends on how you summarize the work. It's abstracts are supposed to be very small, so if you are able to summarize your work in a very concise manner, I think that works out. But why I chose option D is that the role of the abstract, according to me at least, the most important purpose of the abstract is to basically compel your reader to read, like compel whoever is reading, the audience, to read further. So the abstract should not only be concise, it should be very fascinating. So a little bit of discussing why the findings are important, and a little bit of discussing, like trying to convince the readers to read the article. But I think C and D, both of them can work out. um, B should also be fine. You can discuss a little bit about the motivation of the research, but I think a little bit information about the findings is also necessary. Depending on all the papers, like according to all the papers I have read, they also at the last sentence in the abstract part, they generally talk a little bit about the finding. Like we actually talked about this signaling pathway, blah blah blah, and from our research we found out that this is a very broad, very vague, not vague, very broad way to discuss a little bit of the result. So some most research articles in the abstract portion only, they'll provide little information about the findings also, because providing a little information about the findings will obviously convince the readers to read more. If you only talk about your motivation and you don't write anything else, I think that won't work out. Whenever I'm reading a paper, I need to know what I can expect from the paper, and I think for that I'll go and read the abstract first. So if I get a little bit knowledge about the expectation, then that will be good. So I think C and D can be the answers. Summary, but you have to be very careful how you summarize the entire research. I think that's why I think most people write the abstract at the end, because abstract needs to be very concise, and after you're done writing the entire manuscript, I think that's the right time to write the abstract. Perfect time to write the abstract. So, and also you should be able to convince your readers to further go through the article. So I think that's why I chose D. So, and obviously you need to explain a little bit about why the findings are important. If you do not talk anything about the importance of your work, I think that won't work out as well. So if you talk a little bit about how your findings can be put into the context of the broad research that has already been happening, or how your findings open a completely newer avenue for future research, I think that will also compel the readers to read forward. the audience to read forward. So I think that's why C and D, they can be very well be the correct options. Next question, moving on to the next question. Why is it important to spend time writing an abstract for a research report? What do you think? Whenever you start reading a literature article, like what basically compels you to read further? Anybody?
Option A.
Anybody else? Any different opinion? Yeah, I also agree. It's option A, because the first thing that anybody will read after the title is the abstract. So readers definitely use it to decide if they wish to read the full article. That's why your abstract should be very compelling. That's what we discussed in the last question also. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following is not a goal of the introduction? Anybody? Take your time and read the options and let me know what do you think. Anybody? Not a goal of introduction. Okay, so I think it's yeah, option C. Articulate the purpose of your research. Definitely, you need to write a little bit about why you're particularly interested in this kind of research. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. So that forms in the introduction part only. Convince the readers to be interested in your research. Definitely, I think this part is also very important in abstract introduction discussion. These few sections are very important, because these are the first time you read through a paper, you skim through these sections only. Provide a detailed analysis of the findings and implications of past research and history of the field. Implications of past research and history you cannot give a detailed analysis of everything, to be very honest. So otherwise your paper will only have the literature review part only, nothing else. So detailed analysis is not possible of everything. You have to be very picky in that manner. You have to choose the proper you have to narrow down the past work that has been done based on what you are trying to show, and then situate your research in the context of current trends and past literature. Very important. This option D is very important. You should always put like whenever you are communicating your work to the audience, you should always put that in perspective of whatever has been published and whatever is yet to be discovered, yet to be recognized. So this option D is also very important. C is the most relevant option, most relevant answer for this question, because detailed analysis of everything is not possible. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following is the main goal of the method section of a research report? This also we have discussed previously also. Let's see. Anybody? Which do you think is the most relevant? That doesn't mean that the other options are wrong. The other options might also be correct, but out of the four, which do you think is the most relevant? So we discussed this last time also. It is to provide enough detail to allow an independent researcher to carry out your research. Obviously, you need to meticulously articulate how you analyze the data. Only conducting experiments is not enough. I think analyzing a data is very important, and I think it's one of the most difficult parts of research. You can conduct experiment, you can read previous papers, you can optimizing is also difficult, but you can still optimize and carry out the work. But if you don't know how to portray it, how to analyze your data, how to basically show, how to interpret from your data, then nothing makes sense. You actually conduct experiments to interpret something from it. If that is only not possible, then what is the point? So obviously you need to articulate in a research paper how you analyze the data. But more than that, the main goal of the method section is to provide enough detail to allow another researcher to carry out the research. Option C, outline the demographic information of your participants so that reviewers can access the generalizability of your research. Okay, but I think that's not the main goal. Option D is discuss the procedure you use so that readers can decide for themselves if the protocol is biased. Also true. This none of the options are wrong here, because you need to sometimes people, even readers, only figure out if the protocol is biased or not, and they also, like, wherever someone is reviewing a paper or after your paper has been published, also whenever someone is reading through your paper, they can actually feel that the protocol used might have been biased. So that is also true. None of the options are absolutely wrong over here, but option B is the most relevant option because that is the main goal of the method section of any kind of manuscript or research report. Moving on to the next question. Why is it so important to discuss participant characteristics such as demographic variability? Anybody? Demographic means basically a particular sector of population. Like if you're, how will I explain? If you're conducting an experiments with people from different age groups, people from different genders, then you need to explain that properly in your work. But why do you think these kind of explanations or these kind of characteristics are very important and need to be mentioned all the time whenever you're writing? Like, what is the reason? Why should I tell everyone if I have chosen 2 males for the study or 3 females and 1 male for the study? Why should I tell everyone the age group of people I have taken samples from? Why do you think it's important? Think about it. I'll give you an example. Suppose I have taken some samples from a hospital, some patient samples, and I'm trying to see some patient samples, some from diseased patients, some from healthy patients, and I'm trying to. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Someone was here, right? Yeah. Yeah. So I've taken some samples from diseased patients and some from healthy patients. Now I'm trying to show that these proteins or these things are more in quantity in diseased patients than healthy patients. So these things might be the implications of the disease, or these things might be the cause that has led to this disease. That's what I'm trying to say that. But why do you think it should be important that I mentioned if I've taken females for the study or if I've taken males for the study? Why do you think it's important that I mention if the ages of the females are below this, if the age of the male is above this? Why do you think all this is important? I can just randomly say I took samples from these random people, and I can also give no information, further information. Why do you think this demographic information is important? Anybody?
Yeah, so that if someone is trying to replicate the same experimentation, he should be aware whether like how general that the outcome of the research, how general it is, or
So
how
what do you think
specific
the
it
option is? Correct option is here.
The
You
correct
said
option
it.
is A. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. So it allows readers to assess the generalizability of your findings. Now, if you say that if you take some female participants from, like, samples from females from a hospital, and then you compare disease and healthy individuals, and you say these are the things that are upregulated, these things are more in quantity in these. It doesn't show the generalizability of your findings as such, because nobody will be able to know if your results are general to both male and females, or your results have come like that just because you have selected female participants. That's why a diverse set of samples is very required. Then the age group is also very required. Any kind of comorbidity is also required. If, for example, if someone has taken samples from COVID patients from a hospital, some from healthy, people who do not have COVID, and some people who have COVID, and they have different levels of proteins and lipids in those samples. Like, I need to know what is the age of the people are selected. What if that person is above 60? Above 60, once you reach a particular age, there are a lot of other diseases that happen anyway. I need to know if that person is diabetic from before. I need to know if that person has any kind of bone issue from before. If they have any kind of osteoporosis or anything from before. I need to know if that person has some kind of like nerve disease from before. Because all of these affect your results. If you have during the COVID, if you have read through the news also, people having any kind of comorbidity had a higher chance of like higher chance of their bodies getting more affected by the virus compared to younger people. Younger people, I'm not saying in a very general manner, but it has been seen that younger people do not get affected by the virus as much as compared to the older people, because older people obviously have a lot of diseases. Most people have a lot of diseases already happening in their body. As soon as you cross a certain age limit, something start happening. I need to know if the participant you have taken is 80 years up or not. When you reach 80 years, you'll have a lot of issues. You'll have kidney problems, you have bone problems, a lot of things will happen, because you're old. That's what happens. I need to know the sample that you have taken is from a diabetic patient or not. Diabetes is a game changer for any kind of other disease. If diabetes, it's called a silent killer because there's a reason for that. Like, when you hear diabetes, it might not shock you as such in the first glance, but it is a silent killer because it changes a lot of things in your body, and it actually makes your body much more vulnerable to any other kind of disease. A patient who does not have diabetes has a greater chance of surviving any other kind of disease than a person who has already had diabetes, because internal things are already disturbed in that person who has diabetes. So that's why any kind of data that I'm taking, I need the demographic variability very clearly. Also, for males and females, the hormones are different. Different hormones are upregulated at different time points. Especially in females, it's very important. Also, males and females have different kinds of hormones, different upregulation, downregulation. I cannot compare a male in case of all the, if I'm, suppose I'm taking the samples and I'm checking the levels of all proteins, all lipids and everything. I cannot randomly compare a healthy 70-year male with a diseased 16-year female. It doesn't make sense. Your results have to make sense, because any kind of variability in your results will affect what you are trying to get. So I cannot compare these two random people's data and say that COVID-19 is causing this. Just because the 16-year-old female has COVID-19, he or she has these proteins or lipids upregulated, more in number. She's a female, her age demographic is different, everything is different. So that's why this demographic variability is very, very important when you're doing any kind of research. Because it basically helps you to assess the generalizability of your findings. If you can show that the same kinds of proteins and the same kinds of lipids are more in number or more in quantity in diseased people across a wide range of age, if you have taken samples from suppose 15 years old to 80 years old, if you can show that most of these proteins are upregulated in all the diseased patients, if you can show that the levels are upregulated almost equally in both the genders, then that shows that your data is more, your finding can be, the generalizability of your findings is more. You get what I'm trying to say? So that's why demographic variability is very important. Also, that's why option A is correct. What does option B say? Option B says that it's the most important piece of information to help reviews decide if you appropriately chose your data analysis technique. Option A makes more sense from option B, honestly, because your demographic variability importance, I don't think it will have that much effect on your data analysis. It will have an effect, but generalizability of your findings, that option makes much more sense because of the reasons I mentioned. It discusses how your recruitment methods are different from past studies. None of the above reasons demonstrate why it's important. So obviously option A is more important, because as someone said also, that whenever you're trying to replicate, someone else is trying to replicate your data. I have worked with 15-year-old female samples and 80-year-old male samples. Someone else is trying to replicate my data and they take a completely different age demographic. They take 40-year-old female and male. They take completely different gender demographic that obviously our data won't match. It depends on a lot of factors. This demographic variability, that's why it's so important. Yes. So moving on to the next question. Due to its technicality, the most difficult section to write is often which of the following? due to its technicality. This is the key portion of this question. Materials, procedure, introduction, results. What do you think is the most difficult section? If you have ever written a report or if you have ever written a manuscript, which, forget the question, which section did you find the most difficult to write and why? Anybody? Or if you have also not, if you have never written also, what portion do you think will be the most important based on the knowledge that we already have regarding the different sections?
Introduction.
Do you think introduction was the most difficult due to its technicality? Do you think introduction part will be very technical because introduction we are basically trying to write the literature review and trying to narrow down your objective, whatever is happening? It's basically the beginning of the manuscript. Do you think it will be very technical, that's why it will be the most, it might be difficult because you're trying to make your paper more compact, you're trying to figure out which parts you should include and which not to include, you cannot make it too long or too elaborate, true, but do you think it's very technical because you things have already been published and you're trying to you're trying to make it more compact and write it due to its
Yeah,
technicality? Which one do you think?
yeah, I was actually thinking in a way that how much technical should the introduction be?
Okay,
Because
okay,
introduction, the another way of like another purpose of introduction is
it's
to,
to make readers convince,
yeah, impress the readers.
yeah,
And as you
true,
mentioned, you cannot throw, yeah, throw too much of technical jargon.
true,
Otherwise, the person who is expert into field will definitely be interested in your paper because he is
correct,
seeing the similar jargons there. But a person who is probably not, at that level, maybe the students, they will probably avoid that. So
correct,
I was thinking
true,
in that way.
true, that way also it does make sense. Yeah, that makes sense as well. Anybody else has any different kind of answer? So whatever you said makes sense because introduction should be should limit the use of scientific jargons to so that the readers are impressed enough to read further. According to me, I found the result section due to its technicality very difficult to write because procedure. If I have already figured out the protocol and everything, I have conducted the experiments, then I can just write whatever I've done. Materials is also very, if I've used those reagents and used that instrument, it's easy to write. Results is difficult because the reason why I chose this because getting data is not the end point, right? We have to analyze the data, and I think analyzing a data, doing any kind of statistical tests on those data, on that data, and then figuring out an interpretation from that data, I think that is the most, according to me, I found it the most, I find it the most difficult to write because I think that's a very technical part of your work. For me, I feel analyzing data and doing all the statistical tests to figure out if whatever you have found out is statistically significant or not, I think these parts are very are difficult to write. So that's why when the question, when it mentioned due to its technicality, I think that's why I found basically the interpretation. Results means the conclusion or interpretation part was, you take a lot of experiments, you've done a lot of experiments, you take the data from that, you analyze the data, and then you figure out a way to interpret that. How you will show the data, will it be a box plot, will it be a bar graph, it will be a pie chart, how do you show it? There's so many ways to show a data. So I think because of all of that, I felt the results part might be most difficult. But if you think in a different way, I think introduction also makes sense because you have to while you have to limit the use of scientific jargons, you also cannot totally eliminate the use of technical terms because just not possible. We cannot totally eliminate all the technical terms in a write-up. We can limit it to a certain amount and use a little less scientific jargons. So I think in another perspective, introduction will also work out. Yeah, I agree.
In fact, the same same concept applied on results too, because it doesn't matter how complicated your procedure is, your result has to be in a clear
Very
and
hard.
concise manner.
Correct.
Like after listening to what you said regarding results, that there are many ways you can showcase your result, and
Yeah.
like you have to choose the best way. So, like if I also combine your statement, I think results is a better option than introduction.
Because I have seen this happen in lab group meetings all the time. So people do experiments and they show their data in a particular format, and then when a lot of people are sitting together in a lab group meeting and they try to figure it out. Other people who have not done the experiment, other people who do not know the motivation, proper motivation behind the experiment, other people who do not know what my aim is, like they ask, what do you want to figure out from this experiment? Why did you do this experiment? Just because you had the reagents, or did you have any particular objective in mind? So when they ask that kind of question, that's when you actually go back and reiterate and think why I think why I did that experiment, and then I figure out, and then this is probably not the right way to show your result because I'm not able to figure out anything. Why don't you show it in a different manner? Why don't you show it like a bar graph? Why don't you show it in a different kind of plot? So I think all these things are very important. Obviously, we learn it with experience. Your supervisor will be the best person to guide you regarding this kind of things because we are all starting out and we are not exactly established in our field yet. But your supervisor obviously had a much more experience and knowledge than you. So when they look at your data, they'll be able to tell that do not why only showing images. It happened to me in the last group meeting only. I was doing something and I showed some microscope images, and I was trying to show some random images, and I was trying to show that this filament structure has changed to this dot-like structure. So my supervisor, like, these are very vague statements. You cannot show random pictures and say that this filament structure said, I can see that some changes happened, but what percentage has changed? You have to take a lot of pictures, a lot of frames. You have to image that. You have to use a different software to actually help you quantify the amount of filaments and the amount of dot-like structures that have formed. So I was trying to say that after a treatment, the filament-like structure has changed to a different kind of structure. It was a biological sample. And I was showing random images and coming up with the conclusion. So it's like, this is not a significant result. You cannot show random images and tell people to believe whatever you're saying. That doesn't make any sense at all. You can show that image as something people can it's basically something people can visualize. People are seeing this, okay, this change was happening, but I cannot tell the percentage from a random image. So then what she suggested was that you have to take a lot of images over a lot of time frames. You have to repeat it at least 3 times to show the reproducibility of the data, and then you have to use this particular software to like process your image. And there are different a lot of hi-fi softwares that we can use to process images and see the volume of the cell, if it's increasing or decreasing and all of that. So if I can figure that out, then maybe I can show in a bar graph. Then like compared to the healthy sample, my sample is showing this kind of difference in the volume of this thing, or in the filament structure or filament number of this thing. So all this I was not able to figure out at the first glance, but someone told this to me. So that's why I felt analyzing stuff and presenting it to general audience is so difficult, because I cannot show random things and claim that this is happening. What have you conducted any kind of test, statistical test? Have you conducted any kind of test to show that whatever you're getting, the difference is significant and not something based on your manual error, any error that you made? So I think that's very technical and that's very difficult to figure out in the first time only. With experience it has come. Like, we can always take advice from a senior PhD students will be able to guide better. Obviously a supervisor, definitely. So that's why results part is very, very important. It's very important actually to analyze and portray your results in a proper manner. So yes, I agree with whatever you said. So next question: which of the following is usually beyond the scope of the results section of a quantitative research report? What do you think is the most relevant out of the 4? Like, out of the 4, what 3 options can you absolutely you cannot miss? Which options do you think you cannot miss from a result section at all? And there'll be one option that is also included in the result section, but okay, out of the 4 options, that will be the most relevant. What do you think? So this question is also very dicey, because I feel all 4 are very important and all 4 should be included in the result section, I personally feel. But then out of the 4 options, I think 3 are absolutely very important and 1 is like not that important, might be. So what do you think? But it's definitely a dicey question. It's like all 4 should be explained properly. Anybody? So I think all the 4 options are very important for the result section. I am saying this before only. Yes.
Yeah, I mean they are so much
Uh-huh.
so much related, and
Yes,
like
yes.
it's really hard to figure out. But if I stick to the word which is quantitative, okay, so I feel that B could be something like see,
B.
beyond the scope that, yeah, beyond the scope, that is really confusing me because
Okay.
beyond the scope. Okay, so in that way, A could be like maybe skipped, or it's a bit confusing for A because um, in some points it's really necessary to
Yeah.
describe what statistical technique use, but again, statistical technique could also be mentioned into procedures. Okay, and we are speaking of results. So in that way, maybe we can skip statistical technique, like assuming
Okay.
that we have already mentioned it in
Okay.
the procedure section. So maybe we can directly talk
Yeah.
about the result, like
Other 3.
what we have got.
Yeah, now that I hear you saying, I think A makes more sense. It depends on what the sections in your paper already, like if you have already explained the techniques in the methods and material section, I think we can exclude the statistical techniques from the result section. And
Uh,
apart
I
from
mean, we
result
can,
section, yeah.
yeah, we can simply name. You don't need to discuss the statistical
Hmm.
technique. If even if you name it, that we
Yeah.
used let's say chi-square distribution,
Yes,
chi-square
yes.
technique, and these were the results. You don't need to discuss the technique because
Yeah.
discussion has been already done in procedure or
Materials,
method.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So I was thinking a different way, but I think this makes more sense. So A, if you have already discussed the techniques in method section, then just naming them in the result section, or if at least even if not naming them might do. Don't need to discuss in the result section, but presenting figures and tables to portray the data is also very important. Presenting specific statistics is also very important. I was thinking that if there's another section after the results part, like conclusion or anything, but generally results, after results there's discussion only. If any kind of manuscript has a different kind of conclusion or interpretation I don't know, conclusion part, then maybe the detailed interpretation of the implications based on the data could have been included in that one. So that's how I was thinking. So I was thinking C might be the right option, because if there's another section after the results part and before the discussion part, um, based on the interpretation, like implication of the data in a very detailed manner, then that can be skipped in the result section. But then your answer makes more sense. I think discussing what statistical techniques were used. If we include this in method section, then we can definitely skip this in the result section, or at least name them. So I think A makes more sense. Yeah, I think you're correct. Anybody else has any different kind of opinion? Okay, so I think A should be the correct answer. Yeah, you're correct. So the next question is, error bars are used for what purpose? They are bar graphs that show the predicted levels of measurement error. They are intervals on graphs that represent the level of variability in the sample. They are bars only used on line graphs that are used to present the level of error in participant behaviors. And they are intervals on graphs that portray the amount of confidence you have in the error levels of the population. What do you think? Okay, so error bars are generally used to present the level of variability in the sample. If I'm repeating an experiment 3 or 4 times, I'll try to show them as error bars, like how much variable my results are coming. So error bars basically will help in further statistical analysis to say if my result, whatever difference I'm getting in normal and treated samples, if they are significant or not, or just a result of any kind of error from my side. So people generally don't do an experiment one time and publish that result. It cannot happen. People generally at least do 3 replicates of each experiment, and they try to show if they're getting any kind of variable results. They try to show it within a bar, like error bar, what kind of variability can be seen in the data. And if this kind of variability is too much to be uh, to be getting a conclusion from it, or if this is fine to figure out the statistical significance from the data. So the option B will be correct. There are intervals on graphs that represent the level of variability in the sample. So next question. This also be discussed a lot of times. Based on the text, the discussion section of an article is analogous to. It's the bottom of an hourglass. So yeah, so that's, we have discussed this a lot of times. So hourglass, we know the structure. The discussion section is at the bottom, the broad bottom of the hourglass. Next question. If you state alternative explanations in your discussion, which of the following should you also consider doing? So we have, discussion means the end of your manuscript, the last section in your manuscript. So you had started with a particular hypothesis, you have discussed, conducted experiments, you have done everything, and then you end your paper with any kind of alternative explanation. So what else, if you are stating any kind of alternative explanation, what else should you also consider doing? Remember, this is the discussion part, like end of the paper. You had started with the primary explanation, you have done your experiments based on that, you have got results, you have interpreted your results, you have analyzed, interpreted results, you have shown, you have written a conclusion. At the discussion section, you talk about an alternative explanation. Then what do you do?
Is it a multiple choice question or a single choice?
I just found randomly on the internet. Whatever you think, you can just say. Even if you think it's multiple answers are correct, that's also fine. What do you think? And then I'll say what I selected based on what I thought. Discussion section at the end, like you're done with the manuscript. That's the last section of any manuscript. So how do you go about it? Anything, I actually want to know all of your opinions, because I might be wrong, because I want to see if your opinions fall into the perspective more clearly. So I'll tell you what I thought. I think it's the option A, because if I am explaining any kind of alternative explanation in my discussion, either I'll say that these are the shortcomings of my research, the primary explanation or hypothesis that I was following. I have tried to prove this, blah blah blah. These are the shortcomings, and this can be one of the alternative explanation that is open to future research. That's another avenue. I can talk like that, or I can say why the alternative explanation regarding that particular phenomenon falls short of the primary explanation that I started with. If I am able to get a very positive result, if I am able to get a very positive result inclined towards the hypothesis or explanation that I started with, then I can write like this, that this is the explanation that I have tried to showcase in my research. There might be an alternative explanation to why this thing is happening, but I think for this reason, this alternative explanation falls short of the primary explanation. At the option B is conduct statistics tests to test it physically. At the discussion session, if you're talking about only that particular paper, in the discussion section, I don't think anybody will talk about any other statistics test to test your alternative explanation, because you have already worked with the primary explanation in the entire paper. You have conducted experiments, you have done statistics on your primary explanation, you have done everything. Discussion section is section is only to put your work in perspective, put your work in a bigger context, and show them why more work should be conducted in this domain. So at the end of the paper, I don't think anybody will talk about conducting statistics experiment. Maybe in future papers, but you yourself won't conduct statistics tests to test them specifically in the paper only. Maybe you can also write something, and maybe you're also working on a different paper, maybe you can publish that afterwards, but in that particular paper I don't think you'll be conducting any kind of tests in the discussion section. Option C is include reviewer comments of whether they think the alternative explanation is better or worse in the primary. It doesn't make sense if you're talking about manuscript, because you're publishing the manuscript, you're getting comments from the reviewers, but I don't think people I have not seen personally people like if you're submitting an article to a journal and the reviewer has sent it back with some kind of comments, and then you rewrite or whatever change you need to make, you have done all that, and then you have resubmitted the paper. Still, I don't think I have come across any paper where I have read reviewer opinions in the published article only. I don't think I have gone through. Let me know if you have read any kind of articles like that where reviewer opinions had been mentioned by the authors only. So that's why I eliminated option C. Option D is present a literature review that would allow readers to conduct a follow-up study based on the alternative explanation. So in the discussion section, I don't think you have the. I don't think people will do a literature review in the last section of the paper that would allow readers. Maybe you can say that this is another thing that is open, that's an open-ended question, and to figure out to know more about this domain, maybe people, there's more to this research, you can do future work, this opens up a newer avenue of work, a new path, this paves the path for new work, future work, all that stuff. But I don't think anybody will do a proper literature review in the discussion section, which is the last section of a research paper. I think that's not encouraged also. So for all these reasons, I feel option A might be the most relevant option, because if I was able to show results inclined towards my primary hypothesis, I will write that this phenomenon might also have an alternative explanation, but these are the reasons why my hypothesis makes more sense and why this alternative explanation doesn't make that much sense. So because of all these reasons, I think option A is the most relevant. If you feel there might be other, if you have a different opinion, do let me know. Or if you ever come across any paper where reviewer opinions have been included in the paper, I don't think I have seen any kind of paper like that. There might be. I haven't come across, in my domain at least, I haven't come across any paper where authors have willingly written about reviewer opinions in their paper. I don't think so. So do let me know if you ever come across a paper like that. So for that's why I chose option A. Anybody with any different kind of, any different perspective, opinion? Okay. So we'll move on to the next question. Which of the following is not usually a part of the discussion section in a quantitative research report? Which discussion is the last part of the research report? Always, you remember the hourglass. So which option do you think doesn't make any sense? Like which option should not be included in the discussion section at all? Anybody?
I think D could be the answer. Like,
Last option, right?
yeah, last.
Yeah, correct. So it's discussion of what motivates the research. All this happens in the introduction section only. Introduction, little bit in the abstract, and then little bit in the introduction. And the literature that preceded the current research study, obviously you will start with that. You will start the paper with that. So all this entire thing happens in the introduction part. At the end of the paper, you obviously won't go back to why you started writing the paper. That doesn't make any sense. But in the discussion section, you can actually present a summary of the important findings and specific results. I think that you can do. The important findings from all the experiments that you conducted, you can write a little bit, maybe one sentence to summarize everything, and specific results that you have gotten. General implications of the research also you can write in the discussion section. Definitely. Future research, very important. I think the most important part of discussion is explaining how your research fits into the context of the whatever is happening, what research is happening all around the world, and how your research opens up a path for future research. I think that's one of the most important goals of discussion section. Practical applications and how your work will help in further research. That is what you should end your paper with. So the first three options make sense. The last part does not make any sense. The fourth option is the correct answer. Next question. Which of the following is true of the reference sections? Anybody? Option
C.
C,
The
correct?
C.
Yeah, correct. Anybody
List
else?
all the citations.
Yes. Anybody else? Yes, so she's correct. It will be option C. Only the key references, that doesn't make any sense, because you, whatever you are citing in the paper, you need to write everything in the bibliography or the research reference section. Definitely. Strict formatting guidelines. Every journal has their own way of showing reference. Even not in journal. Even when you are submitting any kind of thesis to your institute, be it masters, bachelors, or doctoral thesis, I think all institutes, at least all departments, will have their own way of reference guidelines. At least in our institute, people like department always lets us know the kind of formatting, like the kind of reference, that what guideline we should follow while writing the references, in any kind of, not only psychology, in any kind of research work. And so option C makes the most sense, because you have to write all the citations in the research report, otherwise that would be counted as plagiarism. So if you have taken any information from any previously published work, if you have tried to build upon any information in any previously published work, everything needs to be acknowledged in the report. So yes, you should list all the citations in the research. Option C is correct, you're right. The next question: which of the following is recommended with regards of using the word proof? Anybody? You can have a different opinion. That's absolutely fine. So this is what I was saying when I said, I think option A is correct. I'll tell you why. So this is what I was saying when I said that you have to have a very careful choice of words when you're writing scientific report, because any anomaly in writing the words will cause a lot of debate. So during my master's presentation, I remember I had written in my thesis, I had written certainly, or a very emphasizing word I had written to show something in the results section or in the interpretation section. I had showed indeed. I think I had used the word indeed or certainly. I don't remember. So when you think about words like this, I thought it's okay. I can write like that. But I remember one of my committee members actually stopped me and said, "Why did you write the word indeed? What else in the sentence do you want to put more emphasis on?" And I was clueless. I didn't even remember what he was talking about, because I submitted the report 1 week before, and this 1 week I was entirely preparing myself for the presentation. Now he's talking about something he has read in my report, and I was like clueless. I'm like, I don't remember. So that's when he was like, you have used a word like this, indeed or certainly, in any part of your report. So why are you putting so much emphasis on this? Why are you doing this? So I remember I was spellbound. I didn't have any answer. So that's when I realized the actually importance of inferential verbs, or any kind of, why you should be so careful with the word choice, because you have to defend everything you write or say. For scientific, any minute thing that you say, I've seen people being stopped in the middle of a presentation because they had used a wrong verb. Someone has said, so this shows, so someone stopped that person and said, how can you claim this fact from whatever you're showing? It doesn't make any sense. You're absolutely chalking out random data, random things. You have a very biased mindset. You have started your work thinking about something, and that's what you're saying here. Your data in no way demonstrates whatever you're saying. So you might be in love with your data, but your data has to make sense logically. It doesn't, whatever you're saying and whatever you're showing, these two don't match together. I have seen this happen to a senior student in front of me. They were stopped in their seminar because they used a very emphasizing word. Like I know whenever we are doing experiments, we are always in love with our work. Because we put so much effort in it, we do not see the shortcomings in it at the first glance. But whenever you're speaking something or when you're writing something, you should be able to defend each and every word. And that's what I've learned from that my master's presentation. I was stopped in the middle of my presentation. Not stopped, I think I stopped because I was saying something else, and then he asked me, in the report also you wrote something like this, indeed or certainly, why did you mention that word, what did you mean by that, why did you put so much emphasis on that word? So that's why whenever you're using any kind of inferential words, like they have a very experienced scientific researchers, they have a very proper toolkit of phrases that they use to characterize how their evidence relates to the possible conclusions. Okay, for example, we can say that a piece of information is compatible with, or suggests that, or indicates that, or shows, or basically this shows an idea, whatever you're trying to say. This is just in order of certainty, whatever we are trying to say. Like when we are saying are compatible with or are consistent with, what we mean is that our data is compatible with more than one interpretation, but at least they're compatible with the interpretation what I am showing. Okay, suggest, when we say suggest, we mean that our data supports the interpretation at an issue more than they support other interpretation. When we are saying this data suggests that this might be happening, so we are saying that this data suggests whatever we are trying to say in a better manner than than it suggests any other kind of interpretation. So indicate, show, demonstrate, all of these represent a higher level of certainty in that hardly any other interpretation could account for the data. But when we say prove, we mean that there is absolutely no way or absolutely no possibility that any other interpretation might be correct. So most scientists never use the word prove in their writing. They use the word suggest, incompatible, like compatible with, inconsistent with, indicate, like this. When you're saying prove, even when you're saying suggest, you're saying that my data suggests this interpretation to a much higher certainty than it suggests any other interpretation. But when I'm saying prove, I'm saying that there is no other way any other interpretation is possible. There is no other way any other conclusion is possible. I think that's not the correct way of, like, most people do not recommend. That's why they do not recommend using the words like prove in your write-up. Okay, so that's something you can also read more about why people do not approve of the word prove. Now there might be scientific articles which have this word prove and they have also been published, that might also be true, but most scientists for this reason they do not think it's a good idea to write prove rather than suggest, showing, demonstrate. All these verbs are more practical in that sense. So the point is, whatever you're writing, whatever you're saying, do not just do it for the sake of it, because whoever is judging your presentation or whoever is reading your article, they'll have a very, and if that's a person or from your field, basically if that's a professor or committee member, not a layman professor, committee member, they'll stop you right then and there and they'll ask you to defend. And if you're not able to defend what you have written or what you're saying, then that makes no sense. Because I remember I was spellbound reading my presentation. I was like, I am in a completely different zone because I have prepared for this presentation for 7 days and I'm talking about it. I don't remember what I've written in my report. I had submitted the report 1 week before. And he was like, what, you wrote something like this in your report also. What did you mean by that? I'm like, why did I write? I don't remember. I was like clueless. So that's not a good thing. So you should be able to defend everything you're writing and everything you're speaking, because in science there's no, there's no option to be vague or ambiguous. If you're writing something with such certainty, you have to have the guts to defend that also. So that's why we call that PhD defense. You're defending whatever you have worked your entire PhD on. So that's why prove is not generally used. You can actually read more if prove should be used or not. You can ask your supervisor or your senior students if they use this word, and if they don't, why do they not use this kind of word.
I had the similar incident
Okay.
with using the word improvement.
Improvement. Okay.
Yeah.
What happened?
So like the similar idea that the counter was what you are trying to do here is like you have taken just a subtext and you cannot generalize it by using the word improvement.
Yeah.
Okay. So like in similar way which you are trying to say that neglect, like please don't try to use proof until and unless it's like it is completely remarkable thing.
Yeah.
So on the same line, I was stopped, I was questioned for using the word improvement, and eventually I had to change the
Yeah. So these people who are judging our presentations or our report, they're very experienced people. So they have also done the same mistakes at some point in their life and probably they were of our age, so they know much more than us, and when they are stopping us, mostly it's because they want us to get better at whatever we're doing. So I remember the professor then, when I was clueless, I remember he actually stopped me and he made me understand why writing random words in your sentence is not good. I understand that you have put in a lot of effort in your work, and I'm not saying that you have not. You have done a lot of work, you have put in a lot in your work, but when you're using words like this, you have to be very sure why you're using this, because it doesn't make any sense. When, like, why did you use the word indeed out of no reason? Why are you using the word certainly? What other data or what other things do you have to show? Because you're using a particular word and you have nothing to back that up. This happened with me. He was very polite and he made me understand, so I remember it, but that's still not a good experience because I was actually clueless for one entire minute. I could not remember where I had written certainly and indeed and all of that. And the other incident where I had seen my senior, she was actually stopped in the middle of a presentation and asked, I don't think this is matching. Whatever you're saying, it's not matching with the data at all. So do not you throw away random words just for the sake of it or just because you have done an experiment. You need data to show. You're not claiming, whatever you're claiming is not true at all. From your data, it's not true at all. So yeah, I think using particular words and defending the work is very, very difficult and very important also. So maybe we can stop here. If you guys have any other questions related to that, maybe we can answer this or we can continue from the next class. Anybody? Any different opinion from any of the questions that we discussed today? Because we also someone was talking about the layout of a research thesis report. I'll check once on the internet also. I chose the answer based on what I have seen, one of my seniors PhD thesis report, but it also depends. It might change from department to department also. In our department, that was probably the format, and that's why she has followed it. I'll check it also because whatever you said also makes sense. Some people write the introduction and literature review in chapter 1, they move to objectives in chapter 2. But she has written literature. She has written introduction and rationale and motivation for the study and objectives in chapter 1. She has moved to literature review, a huge. She has written, I think, huge. I think 30-40 pages of literature review in chapter 2. So it depends on the department also. So I'll check if there is a proper, outline, that proper common outline out there on the internet. I'll check and let you know. Thank you for the question. Yeah. Anybody else? Any further question that you have, or we'll continue this from the next class? Okay. Thank you guys. If you still have questions, you can always write in the discussion forum of the NPTEL course. We'll be there. We'll check that and we'll try to answer as soon as possible. So if there's nothing to say, maybe we can conclude the meeting. Yeah, someone has raised a hand. Fariha, did you want to say something? I cannot see any chat messages. You can unmute and say. Thank you for this. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayur, for being so interactive. Thank you, Professor Sally. Thank you, Fariha. Thank you. So maybe we can conclude the meeting and we can continue the discussion from the next session. I'll stop the meeting.